Welcome to the Raise Podcast. I'm Coral.
And I'm Natalie.
And we're here to help you raise your game whilst raising the next generation.
We want to help put the power in your hands and inspire you to live your life the way you choose. Ready to raise some questions?
Well, so are we.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Raise Podcast. Today, we are joined by Dr. Zach Bush, a pioneering voice in medicine and regenerative health, whose work spans the microbiome, farming, spirituality, and the future of humanity. If you've ever felt that our current systems aren't built for true healing, this conversation is one you don't want to miss.
Zach, thank you so much for joining us today. For those who may be new to your work, could you start by sharing a little bit about your journey from conventional medicine to the regenerative soul-led path that you walk now, and what key messages that you feel most called to share with the world today?
Well, thank you for having me on, Coral, Natalie. Thank you all for joining this. I think that each of these podcasts, as they've happened over the many years, are their own thing. That's a co-creation, and the future audience that will be listening to this is already co-creating the information. And so I'm as curious as anybody as to what information comes today, because it seems to be different every time. I've maybe done 800 or 1,000 podcasts over the 10 years. And for that, I've never had the same conversation twice. And it speaks to a little bit about what intelligence is, because intelligence is not something that comes from a human being. Intelligence actually comes through a human experience because we're in a complex ecosystem. One of the beautiful experiences as a human is that when you put your ecosystem near somebody else's, it creates a constellation event, not just of two human minds, but of two human ecosystems. And there's an interplay that immediately starts to happen. And so in the quick hug that we got as I came in, already our bodies are communicating. Already our microflora, the bacteria, fungi are adjusting to the energetic systems you all have created together, to, sisters-in-law. You guys have intermingled your families. You've got, the kids that are cousins, and it's such a beautiful thing that you guys have created together. And that's created an ecosystem that I just walked into. And so I just walked into an organic garden that we would call Coral and Natalie. But the fact is, this is like a really fun journey for me. So yeah. I'm as curious as you as to what the heck comes out today.
Amazing.
So what do you think are the key messages that you are kind of known for and wanting to share?
Over the last 30 years, I've been really working at this intersection of human health and planetary health, at the intersection of cell biology and the way in which it's expressed in complex ecosystems. And so that can happen in a cellular system of a human body, which I was trained in. So I got my MD, and my medical doctorate had me focusing on human disease very quickly. My very first year as any doctor trained globally now, we'll get some introduction to the concept of physiology. Like, here's how a normal body works. Here's what a liver does. Here's what kidneys do. But that's literally 3 months. And then the next 30 years, you're just studying the disease that's affecting those organs. And so really, by the time you finish medical school, you've lost track of the fact that human health is a phenomenon and perhaps a miracle. You've lost for all that for the complexity of what is now in our current CD breakdown, our kind of comprehensive volumes of diagnostic codes for diseases. The one that just came out has 18,000 diseases listed. And so as a medical doctor, you're getting exposed to 18,000 different diseases affecting, a couple dozen human organ systems, with somewhere around, 500,000 species that are inside of that body that you're not taught about. And so the systems are just so complicated that the idea that they are self-organizing, self-creating, self-healing is just held away from us for a long time. And so my cell biology background got me into ultimately cancer research. And it was in cancer research that I found a niche, which was mitochondria. And the mitochondria are these fascinating little bacteria that live inside of human cells. And most doctors even don't realize that mitochondria are bacteria. And so these little bacterium developed 3 billion years ago as the environment got more and more complex in its forms. And suddenly we had this massive innovation of light energy. And so mitochondria can produce 10 times more energy per unit than a bacteria or a fungi can, because of this magical thing that's called respiration. And so the respiratory cycle of mitochondria drives the ability suddenly for biology to do multicellular creatures like an earthworm or a human or a dog. That requires an enormous amount of energy. And that's because if you're going to be multicellular, you got to have a lot of communication. And so my area of expertise over the years has become communication networks and energy systems within the human biology or human landscape. And as that went, I suddenly realized by 2012 that you can't have a healthy human landscape if the greater ecosystem, the macro ecosystem around you, isn't also healthy. And so realizing that we have a direct connection between the soils that our food is farmed in, the food itself, the way it's trucked to our groceries, stored, ultimately prepared, and then lands on a plate, all has direct relationship back to our microbiome. And what we've seen over the last 100 years is just a massive case of severe isolation of the human being. And in that isolation, we lost our vitality, we lost the light, and we lost the communication necessary for multicellular life to thrive. And so what we're seeing is this dimming of biology on the planet, leading to the chronic disease epidemic in humans, leading to the extinction events around the world, with this 10,000-fold increase in extinction of species over the last 50 years. So that's like my area of expertise is how do we turn back on the lights? How do we turn back on communication? So my cell biology lab's been focused on that space for the last 15 years or so.
Incredible.
Wow. Amazing.
So you often talk about the intelligence of life and the interconnectedness of all things. What are your core beliefs around what it truly means to be healthy in today's world?
It comes down to those simple two things, actually. So aging is a phenomenon, or disease as an expression of aging is a phenomenon of a failure of communication. Maybe a cool hand Luke moment there. So failure of communication. And then the second one is a diminishment in life force, or less energy per cubic centimeter available to the body. And so vitality is highest states of communication, and unfettered access to information gives a cell an infinite capacity for regeneration. So access to information, communication, and then how much energy you have available for repair. And we're basically all walking around with that ratio, rate of injury to rate of repair. Rate of repair is determined by communication and energy. And so if you think of a normal day, you wake up, you take your first breath on the pillow, you're getting off-gassing carcinogens and chemicals off your mattress, off the paint you're breathing. You take your first few steps, you're putting toothpaste in your mouth that has 30 or 40 chemicals that disrupt the microbiome and gingiva and are, ultimately inflammatory down the cascade. Then you go downstairs and you eat food that's imbued with some of the most potent herbicide chemicals that known to mankind that were used previously for warfare and chemical warfare and now are used for food systems. And you'll eat that. And then you get in a vehicle and you're off-gassing, carcinogens all the way to the office. And then you sit in a cubicle that's off-gassing. It's a freaking miracle the human body's alive today. And so when you think of that, okay, that's your rate of injury. And today it's very high. And the fact that you two are sitting here looking quite healthy and vibrant suggests that you guys have a lot of light per cubic centimeter. You guys have figured out a lifestyle that's supporting an extremely high rate of regeneration, because I know you're dying quickly. And so you have to be birthing constantly to maintain a healthy body, period. When you amp up the toxicity as we have in a modern society, the rate of repair is really unprecedented, and therefore the energy required is massive. And what we're seeing now is a find out that, wow, it's the microbiome that's producing both the communication network and the energy for a human body to exist. And so this era of antibiotics, herbicides, pesticides, all the way to our oral antibiotics from our doctors, our IV antibiotics in our ICUs, all the way to the antibiotics that are used in our food system with cattle, poultry, etc. We're just steeped in antibiotics. And so every time you use the word antibiotic, it's quite literal. The word means against the relationships that allow life to happen. Biotic is the latter. The word biosis or biotic, the relationships necessary for life to occur. The word anti, against. And so by taking an antibiotic in your food system or from your doctor, you are now against the relationships that would create a healthy, vital body. That's the last 50 years. So.
No, it's so true. And it's so sad, but it's amazing what you're doing at the moment to kind of help humanity in the sense. It's incredible. We first came across your work back in 2020 during the COVID lockdown, a time when many of us were first questioning the systems that we live within. We listened to several of your interviews where you spoke powerfully about glyphosate, describing it not just as a pesticide, but as you just said, the most abundant antibiotic on Earth. You also warned that unless we radically change course, humanity is heading towards what you've called the sixth extinction event. For those who may not have heard that framing before, can you explain what you meant by that and how glyphosate fits into the bigger picture of human and planetary health?
Yes. Glyphosate is the name given to a phosphate salt that got added to our food system in 1976 as a potent weed killer. So herbicides, weed killers, pesticides are usually insecticides used all over London. I just found out you have one of our worst pesticides used globally is being used all over London because there was a little moth that got imported from South Asia and is destroying all your little box elder bushes.
What?
And so
I didn't know that.
London's being drenched in a paraquat-like compound and so this is what we've been doing for 50 years is, there's nature threatening something, we need to beat it back.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the 1970s, we were having a complete collapse of the labor force for farming post-World War II, all of that. And so by the 70s, you've got a whole generation of farmers missing because the 1950s, they all had the GI Bill in the United States and they go abroad or they start studying computer science and they're off the farms. So by the 1970s, huge dearth of labor on the farms. And so now you got aging farmers that are managing more and more land with less and less revenue as more and more middlemen came into this whole processed food, commercialized, products. And so the farmer goes from 1950s with 60 cents on every consumer dollar going to the farmer to the 1970s, you're at about 40 cents. By today, you're at 13 cents on the dollar. So farmers just have been making less and less money per unit of effort. And for that, they had less and less labor to achieve their goals. So this is not a farmer problem. This is really a systems problem that developed our current modern chemical warfare approach to growing food. And that's important because I think it's easy to create a bit of, a lot of finger pointing and a bit of a conspiracy theory here. It's just not that. It was a very simple market pressures and economic issues that were facing farmers that led to their codependence on these more and more intense chemical regimens for growing food, and the chemicals replace labor. When you can just sit in a tractor and spray an entire field with an herbicide and the crop still lives, like that didn't happen in 1976. And so 1976, we roll out glyphosate as a weed killer, but by 1996, suddenly it's a crop treatment because we genetically modified corn, soybean, and 30 other crops to be able to handle glyphosate directly. So those are called Roundup Ready crops, patented by Monsanto famously. But we really created as a system, Monsanto. We created the dynamics on a farm that would make them very prone to this sales pitch. And not saying that there weren't a lot of predatory corporate things. Monsanto went across the world suing farmers for patent infringement on farmers that hadn't bought their GMO seed. The phenomenon of GMO seed is your neighbor grows a bunch of GMO corn. That pollen blows into your cornfield and pollinates your corn. And Monsanto would go through and just pluck corn off people's farms and then sue them for patent infringement because they didn't buy the seed from them, but they've got the seed pollen in their food. So they did that, sued farmers all the way across America. Within 3 years, they took over the entire corn and soybean market with that tactic. So there's some grungy stuff in there that were obviously profit-driven, greedy, abusive. But the reality is the table had already been set, and the farmers were already in a very vulnerable state of codependence with the chemical industry. And I would say that my industry of physicians were the same thing. We had become so overwhelmed by 18,000 diseases, and the chronic disease epidemic broke out in the 1990s like something nobody could have ever possibly imagined. And so we went from like number one complaint when I went to medical school back in the early 90s was back pain, and it had been for 50 years. Number one cause of death, cardiovascular disease. Very simple. Cancer was kind of in the mix. By the time the late 1990s set out, in 6 years, with 1991 being the first time we added glyphosate to wheat, and we added as a desiccant or drying agent to first wheat and then all of the legumes, lentils, chickpeas are big ones. Your lentils and chickpeas here in the UK are super toxic. Even worse in India right now, Saudi Arabia, all over the place. But these legumes have to be dried before, like wheat, have to be dried before they're harvested. And these high glyphosate drying agents have this ability to dry the crop within a couple of days of spraying it. And so suddenly we're spraying crops right before harvest. So now it wasn't a weed treatment. Now it wasn't something to keep the weeds down during the season. Now it was being a harvest treatment. And so your residues on wheat suddenly went through the roof by 1993. And suddenly I'm the first generation doctors to suddenly watch this whole sweep of autoimmune systems, and so gluten sensitivity.
Was it really that different? So you've seen it happen that quickly?
Year on year. I mean, it was literally 1993. Nobody was seeing fibromyalgia in their clinic. By 1998, fibromyalgia is the number one complaint of women coming to clinics, in the United States, chronic pain syndromes of all kinds. At the same time, our children suddenly presented attention deficit disorder and the rest. So I guess maybe it's helpful to back up and just, again, glyphosate 1976. And if I can just orient you quickly to a simple graph in your head. If you think of a line graph, your vertical bar on the left, that's going to measure how much light energy or how much metabolism, life force is in the planet or humans. High metabolism, everything's good. Low metabolism, disease occurs. On the other line, we can just put the simple timeline. So on your left-hand side, you're 1976, and we'll run it today at 2025. And so I can just show you exactly what happens when you start to add billions of pounds of a chemical that lowers the light energy and communication in the system. And the way in which glyphosate does this is it poisons bacteria as an antibiotic, and the most sensitive among those are the mitochondria inside your cells. So long before it's affecting your gut microbiome, it's already diminishing the amount of energy you can convert in your cellular system. And so when you take a chemical added to the food system in 1976 that starts to weaken the ability, lower the metabolic life force of mitochondria, the first syndrome you're going to see by the early 80s is obesity. And so suddenly Nancy Reagan and others in the mid-80s are saying, we got to have a war on obesity. It's interesting that the war on obesity phrase came along because the chemical that was causing the obesity was what we used to use in the Vietnam War. And so it was called Agent Orange then, but Agent Orange is just a very near cousin molecularly to glyphosate. So using a chemical warfare agent, we cause obesity, and then we just wage war against the disease. And so we just can't come to the possibility that nature knows no war. Everything is in an ascension path in nature. Everything is reinforcing more beauty, more intelligence, more co-creation. So war on obesity by the early 80s. By late 80s, when you get an accumulation of fat in the liver, you end up with type 2 diabetes. And so that's called insulin resistance initially, and then pre-diabetes, then type 2 diabetes. By the late 80s, everybody's announcing this big new pandemic of diabetes. By the early 90s, the most energy demanding organ system in the body is being affected, which is your immune system. So this is allergy. Suddenly kids are not allergic to peanuts. They're allergic to just about everything you can think of, avocados and wheat and things we've been eating for thousands of years in the humans, suddenly intolerant in our children and young adults, etc. By mid 90s, you see this explosion of autoimmune disease. And so this is where the immune system is so reactive against everything you're eating, breathing, etc., that you start to not know what's inside, what's outside, what's self, what's not self. And that breakdown of information, breakdown of energy, suddenly you become reactive to everything. And so your own organ system becomes your enemy. By 2002, 1 in 4 young girls in the United States by age 12 has antibodies to her own thyroid gland. And so massive, massive destruction of the relationship system that we call an immune system. Immune system is not a battleground as popularized. It's actually a system of relationship building. So immune system is maintaining a relationship between human cells and 40,000 species of bacteria, 500,000 species of protozoa, fungi, etc. And so it's a massive United Nations, basically. And the amount of energy it's taking is enormous because of the amount of information it's handling in a given day. Almost all of that work happens in the first 2 millimeters of the human body, which is between the gut lining and the vascular system. So your gut lining covers a whole tennis court surface area. It's the largest surface area of your whole body interacting with the world. So that huge surface area is interacting with your food, your water, your breath, and then that's immediately affecting your immune system. And so the glyphosate, it turns out, is diminishing the mitochondrial energy and breaking apart all of the Velcro that keeps that tennis court of surface area intact. And so we call that leaky gut. So glyphosate is the foundation of leaky gut, and it's the foundation of obesity, diabetes, and then immune system overload. So allergy, then that moves into autoimmune disease. By the late 1990s, I mentioned it already, but this is where all of the chronic pain, chronic fatigue, and neurologic stuff starts showing up. And so it's fibromyalgia, ADHD, autism, and then in our elderly, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's dementia, Alzheimer's in women, Parkinson's in males. All of it went up like logarithmically by 96, 98, 2000, every one of those 2-year increments. We just couldn't believe what was happening. Nursing homes overwhelmed. Elementary schools overwhelmed. It was just like we could not suddenly keep up with this level of disease. By the early 2000s, we've moved into the cancer epidemic. So leukemias, lymphomas, solid tumors, not going up like 10% or 20%, going up like 300%, 1,000%. in 5-year increments. And this didn't make sense to us as to how cancer even occurs. We thought cancer took like 17 years in a single individual to brew, and it took lots of genetic injury. We were seeing this utter collapse of relationship between human cells and their ability to regulate their own growth. And so cancer was unleashed. By the late 2000s, lower energy. So each of these things that I'm describing is a lower and lower energy on that left side of the graph. So metabolism, life force just decreasing. So we've gone from obesity, diabetes, allergy, autoimmunity, chronic pain, neurologic dysfunction, down to cancer, late 2000s, infertility. And so massive explosion. By that time, I was an endocrinologist running the fertility clinics at the University of Virginia, and I was just on the front lines of it. It was like every 2 days, it was palpable of like, how can this be happening in everybody at the same time? It just didn't make sense. And nobody had any answers. Like, well, women are struggling with fertility, and that was the whole line. We didn't realize that early on because everybody always blames fertility on the woman, but we didn't realize sperm counts were just collapsing globally. And we would find that out a couple of years later, kind of as a global community. But today we have 1 in 3 males infertile by sperm count globally, with the exception of India and Central Africa. But all the rest of the world, all of the rest of the continents are in this massive drop in sperm counts. You add to that 1 in 3 women, in most continents, 1 in 2 in some continents, Saudi Arabia right now, Japan, more like 68% of women infertile.
Oh
so
my God.
This is what extinction looks like, is you can no longer reproduce.
And this is all stemmed from glyphosate.
Glyphosate's the gatekeeper.
And then the impact it's
and then
having
there's
on
1,000 other
cells.
chemicals behind it. You know, so but glyphosate's really, you can map the whole thing to glyphosate and everything else that's been added on. You know, 160 chemicals in a typical California glass of wine.
Of course, yeah.
120 average carcinogens in a daily
accumulation.
cosmetic exposure for a woman. So there's so many pressures that come behind glyphosate. But the reason why I consider it really the smoking gun and the whole, you know, slippery slope here is because it opens up the gate. And so the leaky gut, leaky skin phenomenon, where it's opening up tight junctions, it's opening up the Velcro that's your front line of defense, and it opens up your defense line. So every time you put makeup on, it's just like right in your bloodstream. You go to yoga class, all that microplastic in your clothing is going straight in your bloodstream because glyphosate is in the clothing. It's in the water that you're showering with. It's everywhere. We're currently using 2 billion kilograms of glyphosate a year on the planet.
Wow.
2 billion kilograms. Like, picture anything of 1 billion kilograms, like
You
steel.
can't.
You can't. It's more chemical weight on this planet than you can really wrap your head around, and that's annually.
Just a quick pause to tell you about Happy Mammoth. If there's one thing we're all craving, it's true relaxation, especially as women and mums balancing a million things at once. At Raise, we're all about supporting women to feel more grounded and well, and that's exactly what Happy Mammoth is here to do too.
We're always on the hunt for the real secrets to better energy, deeper rest, and that sense of calm that lasts. And these 2 products are too good not to share: Magnesium Breakthrough and Deep Sleep Mode.
Magnesium Breakthrough is a unique formula combining 5 highly bioavailable forms of magnesium, plus a special activator to help your body absorb it properly. It's designed to ease, relax your nervous system, and support sleep and hormone health without any fillers or fluff.
Then there's Deep Sleep Mode, your nighttime wind-down ritual in a bottle. It blends magnesium glycinate with calming ingredients like reishi, GABA, valerian root, and L-theanine to help you fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer, and wake up feeling restored.
If better sleep and deeper calm have been on your wish list, this is your sign.
And right now, you can get 15% off your first order at happymammoth.com. Just use the code RAISE at checkout, and you deserve to feel like yourself again.
So how do we escape it? Or what, because that sounds terrifying that we literally cannot get away from it. Like, what can we do?
Yeah, maybe.
I know that's
maybe I'm going to go to the last step of the cascade.
Yes, please do, yeah.
Because it almost answers
Okay,
it.
great.
Because it ties us back into long predicted patterns that would occur at the end of an epoch.
Mm-hmm.
And so after infertility, there's one more step as you lower the metabolism of a species, and that's loss of gender. And that is happening by 2010. And what's happening, and obviously it was happening to some individuals much earlier, way back in the 60s and 70s, we were starting to see enough chemicals to start to disrupt gender. And there was chemicals around the glyphosate era, including things like atrazine, that directly disrupt gender. But we had so much collapsed that whole cascade of metabolism that it really uncovered at the population level by around 2010. And so at that point, what's happening is that in utero, the infant goes through it. All fetuses start at neutral, neither male nor female at the biologic level. They have different genetics, X chromosome, Y chromosome, but phenotype, the body that they're building, is at neutral. And then they have to go through an initial explosion of energy expenditure for their first puberty. And so that will happen 3 to 4 months into pregnancy. And that's where you get this really big gender differentiation. And so in ultrasound at 12 weeks, we'll often miscall gender. 20 weeks, you got a pretty good call on gender. But the clitoris penis kind of transformation hasn't happened at that 10, 12 week mark enough, typically, because you haven't gone through your first big, maturation of estrogen or testosterone axis shift. And like anybody knows, in puberty, a kid will eat suddenly a ton of food every day because they're going through puberty. So there's this massive energetic demand at about 3 months of age, then about 2 to 3 years of age, and then at 5 to 6 years of age, and then at 10 to 12 years of age, and then again at 18 to 20 years of age. So we go through these multiple differentiators of gender. And at each point, you certainly have a physical manifestation, which can be, penis versus your vagina. You got this whole cascade of muscle versus more of the central adiposity, so that you can protect the organs peripherally for organ support for the ovaries and things like that. So you've got this whole shift happening at these multiple points. So that's the obvious physical stuff, but the neurologic stuff is what we weren't paying attention to and could have paid attention to a lot earlier, is that those spikes in puberty are changing the neural centers in the deep brain. So there are about 6 different large neural bundles in the deep brain that determine gender behavior. And so this isn't so much, like your outside phenotype, but it's your internal behavior. Why do men act like men? You put a bunch of boys together and they do something really predictably in every culture. They pick up sticks, they whack each other, they do this, that. There's a clear behavioral thing that's happening. And as you go through these blunted energetic puberties, you see those neurologies really being more affected than the peripheral. And that's a little bit of just effect of the actual energy requirements of those tissues. And so a peripheral tissue, something like an ovary, ovary is not a good example. So if you're thinking of peripheral tissue of like lean muscle mass, each of those muscle cells has 200 mitochondria. But the little neural bundle inside the brain, that's 2,000 mitochondria per cell. And so it's 10 times more energy per cell. So if you're on a chemical that's diminishing mitochondrial kind of expression or capacity for energy production, you're going to notice it, the neurology earlier. And that's why we saw ADHD and all that before we saw childhood cancers by about 10 years. And so the neurologic system was being unmasked because it's so energy demanding. Same thing with the immune system. So immune system, neurology, and then eventually cancers, that diminishment was peripheral cells being a little bit more resistant because they just don't need as much energy as the brain. So our loss of gender happens at the brain before it happens in the periphery. My grandson's generation, he just graduated high school last year, and so I got to see his whole generation go through in a compressed way, because that makes me sound really old or something. I'm not as old as that, but my son married us into this incredible grandson of mine. And so I got to watch him grow up from 4 to now 19. And his generation was so interesting because he was really only like 12 years behind my son's generation. And so I got this compression of generations in my family that allowed me to see how fast this was shifting. And his generation, walking around the field in graduation, you got 400 kids. And now it's not just neurologic, behavioral gender shift. You can see the bodies aren't differentiating the same way. And so the hips, the breasts, the muscle mass, all of this is going to a unisex kind of expression. And that's just natural when energy systems decrease. Right. And so as energy is less, you're going to go to a unisex expression. And that's where I get excited about your question, is how the hell do we get out of this situation? And the prophecy that was put in play by almost every indigenous culture over the last couple hundred years has said that there's going to be an eagle and condor moment. There's coming a moment where the human species that has moved into its wounded state of masculine expression is going to open up its second wing, and the feminine will emerge. And when you look at the LGBTQ kind of alphabet, all of it is expressing more feminine. Lesbians, gay, bi, down to queer, the feminine is being expressed in both genders at higher and higher expressions. And so I believe that we are living into a prophecy. And all of those things say that there will be a new humanity that emerges from that eagle and condor moment. And so, like all things human, we have to go through the shadow of the valley of death before we change. And the transformation that's going to happen right now has not been available to the human biology, maybe since our origin, but certainly not in the last few thousand years. And so we're at this very exciting point of, wow, we have taken ourselves to this biologic crippled state so that we can begin again, so that the genders can co-express inside of a single individual instead of needing the polarity of the male and the female. What if each individual begins again with the psyche and the neurology and the behavioral aspects, really understanding the marriage of the masculine and feminine within a single individual? And the Course in Miracles in the 1960s and 70s, an incredible body of knowledge and wisdom that came channeled through that book. That Course in Miracles book details this very specifically in a very non-religious way. The reason I love that text is it's an off-planet piece of information. And so you have this consciousness that's outside of the human system that's answering questions about the human condition. And the answers are so crystalline and so raw and awakening because they're so blatantly obvious as you get that third-party view. And in there, it's very clear that we are going to take ourselves down to this ground down moment so that each individual can let go of external relationships as their definition of self and start to define self wholly inside of it. And so this is moving from what we call special relationships there to the holy relationship. The special relationship is where you think you're incomplete and you're constantly looking outside of yourself for polarity, wholeness. And so we even use this in our language around marriage, right? This is my better half. This is the thing. So we're subconsciously programmed that you will never be whole. So you're going to have to go find that other person. If you can't find that person, that's so sad because you're going to be half a person the rest of your life. We have this programmed into us by Disney, by churches, by all these systems have got us programmed in. And for those relationships, and in some ways, the scary thing is the more functional that human relationship is, the less likely that each individual is going to feel the need to complete itself. And so I think we just got ourselves into a trap where this was our only way to progress. This is the only way we could re-enter the natural cycle of evolution, was to take ourselves to the brink of collapse, to the brink of extinction. And it's this emergence of the feminine and masculine within each of us. That's this balancing act that's happening that has set the eye of the needle so clearly. Like, there's going to be a few people that are going to really emerge and shoot through this eye of the needle of extinction. And I believe we do emerge. And indigenous cultures globally really see this pathway forward. And they all know that we're 50-50. We could go extinct or we could live on to this completely new human biology. And so that's where my excitement and passion happens, is there's definitely a hole there. There's definitely a gap in reality that we can shoot through and become something more beautiful, more intelligent, more radical than we've ever been.
But how would that work reproductive? How have they kind of said within the prophecy that would work? How would we reproduce as human beings? Or is it just something that we can't even comprehend yet?
Yeah, it's not answered in the prophecies. And so that's been my question for the last 15 years since looking for those answers in the lab, but also in esoteric sciences and things like the ancient science. One of the oldest sciences on the earth is the Kabbalistic understandings of science. And so the Kabbalah really speaks to these 7 layers of reality that are on earth simultaneously. We're in one of those, and we're in what's thought to be the 6th reality there from the Kabbalistic philosophy. And so we're in the 6th reality, and we can move to the 7th. And so we can move to this next vibration of existence. Right now, we are doing reproduction genetically. And so we rely on sex and the exposure of an egg to a sperm, all of that for our revelation of something like this. But what we need to move to is more of an energetic understanding of self, and therefore an energetic understanding of reproduction. It's in the mental shift, in the psychological, philosophical shift from I'm carrying all of the trauma of my entire ancestral tree and I'm going to pass that on to my child. We do that. We pass it on, and we repeat our parents' behaviors at the social level, at the economic level. We're repeating these patterns that are all informed by trauma and scarcity. And so this is why we see Syria, Israel, Palestine, Iran or Saudi. All these age-old conflicts are just victim, perpetrator, savior. And we move through this triad of behaviors that are all built on this original wound of we're not enough, we're incomplete, we lost our wholeness, we're therefore sinful and dysfunctional, and our neighbors are not our polarity, they're our polarized opposite, and therefore should be hated. And so this loss of polarity for polarization is all coming out of that genomic expression of trauma. What we're finding out very quickly right now is that the genome is very plastic. It can transform in a split second, and the energy field that it is what generates that change. And so if you move from the belief that genetics determines our future and realize we have an energetic pathway forward, then we start to understand what's happening on the earth with the resurgence of these indigenous practices. Breath work, fire ceremonies, dance, chant, song. Everybody's got a sound bowl now. Everybody's got, a breathwork practitioner. The reason is because we're remembering how to raise the vibration of humans through these ancient practices that kept us alive through many, many adversities that were just as severe as this current one. We've nearly gone extinct multiple times. And we always sneak through, largely because these traditional methodologies of raising the vibration of the human to the point where they get an energetic pathway forward. And when the energetics get high enough, you actually you will do something at the physics level instead of the biology level. And this gets into the cool beauty of water. And so I just set down my water cup here, but that's a good example. So in this glass, you've got a liquid that everybody would say, that's water. Well, it's H2O for sure. And it's in H2O that's in an electrical relationship to itself that makes it appear like a liquid. It's a relatively viscous liquid. It's got an interesting kind of texture to it. Water does. If you feel it compared to alcohol, for example, alcohol is has no texture to it. It's just like evaporates between your fingers. Water's got a thickness to it. Molasses has more thickness to it. A good example of water in another dimension of its expression is Jell-O. And so all you're doing is taking water and then you're adding a protein that crystallizes inside the water structure, and it changes the water to a gel. And it turns out that Jell-O status is what happens inside human cells. And so there's so much electrical light energy inside of a cell because of the 200 mitochondria that are sitting in there churning out sunlight. That's what's happening. You're taking carbohydrates and fats, and the mitochondria are breaking that back down into single carbons, CO2, and in the process releasing all the stored sunlight that was put into those carbon chains by chlorophyll. And so chlorophyll in the green plant grabs CO2, stores photons of sunlight between the carbons, passes that on as sugar and fat. Animal eats that, breaks apart the sugar and fat, releases the sunlight. So we are light beings. That's been used kind of spiritually, but it's biologically accurate. We are light beings, and the brighter we are, the more interesting things happen at the physics level in water. And so even in our disease state that we're at, water's never liquid inside of a cell. There's too much energy there. And so the amount of sunlight interacting with the water forces it into this crystalline state. There's just the right amount of sodium, potassium, and other electrolytes in there to allow the water to go into these complex geometries. So high light energy with high nutrient density, and you get Jell-O. And that gel state holds the double helix of DNA very uniquely. And that's what gives it the bend, the twist of the DNA is due to water structure, not due to the natural state of the gene itself. DNA would just be a flat thing without water. And so water lines the DNA into this beautiful spiraling thing that we think of as the double helix of the classic human genome. It turns out that these methodologies we're talking about, breath work, movement, somatic work, yoga, meditation, qigong, tai chi, age-old, 9,000-year-old practices at least, are showing us that the body's an antenna. And if you bring energy into it, you hold the mudras, you hold these positions, you increase the amount of energy available, the crystalline structure of the water holds more information. With more information, you get more and more complex geometry stacking, and suddenly we could go through a conformational change and hold 4-stranded DNA instead of 2-stranded DNA. And our whole genome reorganizes into a completely new human genome. Again, going into these indigenous practice, sciences, you start to hear these vibrations of maybe there was 12-stranded DNA one time. Atlantis may have been a state of much more complex water structure that held these much higher states of genetic complexity, which allowed for much higher levels of light, which led to much higher levels of intelligence and biodiversity within what was a being that looked like a human. And then suddenly 7,000 years ago, something happens planet-wide. We lose the water structure. There's the poisoning of the water some 7,000 years ago, and suddenly the whole world goes into amnesia. We don't remember how we built all these technologies. We don't know how the pyramids got here. We don't know where the Aztecs went. Like, this is like all globally. It was like, shoop, just like something happened. So it may have been a giant war. Could have been some new technology getting introduced to the world. It could have been lots of different things. Something wounded us deeply at the water structure level, and we lost our genetic intelligence. And now we've been prone to this lower state of social expression, which is war, empire building, rise and fall, collapse of systems. And we've been basically deteriorating for 5,000 years quite quickly. And that acceleration really came on with this whole chemical antibiotic industry in the last 100 years. But it was something that really was already brewing and already diminishing. And you could see it generation on generation. You know, the 8th grade exam in the late 1800s, we even today kind of have that term of, well, they just have an 8th grade education. I don't think there's a college student graduating college today that could pass the 8th grade exam of the 1880s. The complexity of those tests, the complexity of the questions being asked were beyond the current, kind of cognitive exposure that a college kid would get today. The critical thinking that was reflected in that 8th grade population in the 1800s is something that we just have forgotten is even possible for kids. And so we've had this deep, deep deterioration of intelligence, creativity, all of this. And this is how you go from, a Mozart to the Beatles. The Beatles played 3 chords, and we think they're the best band that's existed this century, And so God bless the Brits, but it's like, and now you get house music and it's just one beat. Doof, 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 doof. That's music.
Yeah.
Mozart must be freaking out in his grave. Like, it's like, are you guys kidding me? You don't know you just get that one driving beat, and you can imagine what's happening is you're getting a very simple geometry pounded into your cells, which feels good in one way because it's basically a drug. You're just pounding a drug into the cells of like, let's just add energy, but it's at a geometry because it's an electronic beat that has no relationship to nature at some point that is now separating you further from the natural systems as you're sitting there, on drugs, getting your psychedelic experience with this house music going. I think I just look at it with some sense of awe of like, wow, we've just forgotten the role of beauty of sound, of the beauty of nature, the sound of a songbird in the morning, and what that would do to your biology. What would that songbird do to the water structure inside your cells, and what geometry would you hold if you just laid under a tree for 7 days? You'd be a different biology. All your disease would go away. And yet I can't get my patients to do it because the pressures of the social systems we've lived in, they can't do it for 10 minutes, let alone a week. So we need to reinvestigate how we tune back into nature. And so the exciting thing is there's an obvious path forward. It's an energetic future rather than a genetic determination. We need to wipe out all of the trauma of our DNA through this energetic upgrade. And I can tell you that it's happening. So we'll move on in a second here, but I do want to just drill this home because it's everything I just said sounds unbelievable. How could we have something more than a 2-stranded double helix? It was all theoretical until about 2.5 years ago. And suddenly labs all over the world started seeing 4-stranded DNA in human cells. And it happens quite suddenly. It was like, it definitely wasn't there in 2010, and suddenly it was. And so something happened on the planet to humans that allowed us to start holding 4-stranded DNA. A quadrihelix is a very complex geometry of water compared to a double helix. The only cells in the body that have so far expressed 4-stranded DNA, can you guess which cells those might be?
In the brain?
The brain, that's a good thought. Yeah, that would be one. The heart usually gets thrown out there too.
The microbiome.
The microbiome.
Yeah, of course.
I'm like,
go for the low-hanging fruit for sure.
Yeah.
It's a totally unexpected answer. It's
God.
cancer cells.
oh, okay. Yeah,
Cancer
I wasn't
cells
expecting
are
you to
so
say
far
that.
the only ones to upgrade to this higher geometry.
So
And
what
so
does...
again, what's a disease
Yeah.
and what is health?
Okay.
Is this cascade towards this collapse of the biome and an inevitable realization of the wholeness of the cell? The only cell that's completely lost your human story, that you come from your mom and dad, you come from this people group, and you're Israeli or you're Palestinian or you're whatever. All of these identities that have pressed themselves in with a whole story of trauma into your genome are completely forgotten by the cancer cell. The cancer cell is wholly disconnected from the whole organism and has to go into its own independent understanding of life. It thinks everything else is dead around it. It senses no life around it. And so it goes into what we think of as a cancer behavior. It starts to grow rapidly. can't repair. It's not getting enough resources at any given moment. So it has to go into the scarcity mentality of, I got to stop repairing. There's not enough, so I'm just going to reproduce. And so that becomes a tumor. If the tumor starts to run out of energy locally, then it says, okay, I've got to go into a lower state of being. So I'm going to turn all my cells into what look like fibroblasts, and they're going to go out in the body and create metastases and try to find more resources out in the periphery, because there's no life. Everything's going into scarcity. And that's the cell that upgrades to this 4-stranded DNA. And I'm so intrigued that what all the ramifications are. And so my last stint in academia, 2005, 2010, I was a chemotherapy development guy. So I was doing drug development and chemotherapy, poisoning, the body in some ways, and found my way into the mitochondria and found out I could feed mitochondria instead of poison mitochondria to get the cancer to go away. And so that was a very big transition for my whole mentality of disease and health.
How did you do that? Sorry to interrupt.
I was using vitamin A compounds, and I was watching that if you give enough nutrient density to the mitochondria, they turn on a cell programmed death called apoptosis. And so it was the first realization of like, whoa, maybe it's nutrient deficiency that's leading to all this cancer effect. And maybe we'd naturally remove cancer from the environment all the time in our bodies if there was enough nutrient density energy systems there. And so that was my debut. It turned out that was not a new thought. I thought I had like made the most important breakthrough in science, and then find out like a few months later, talking to a colleague not in academia, esoteric scientist, says, well, you should read Otto Warburg from the 1920s. That guy figured the whole damn thing out. He had it figured out 100 years ago, and he had demonstrated our light microscopes at that time were rudimentary compared to what we have today, but that it took another 100 years to confirm what he had already found was kind of mind-blowing. So at any rate, nutrient deficiency, lack of those high quality nutrients getting into a cell, there's less of an ability for the cell to manage it and regulate its cell cycle. So you start tipping into cancer. And so I get excited around this whole topic because this is what ultimately got me into natural systems. Like, oh my gosh, if we plug human biology back into nature, it's all right there. Nutrient density is right there. So if we reconnect soil systems with microbiome to the plant, and the plant carries that into the human, that connects to my microbiome, that delivers the high dose vitamin A to my cells, I never have cancer. And so I started lecturing that, and nobody would come to my lectures because it had the word healing in it. And so I realized that there's just not an appetite in a world that is defined economically by disease for somebody coming along saying you can actually heal. Like, it just didn't have traction in an academic setting, not because anybody meant poorly. It's just like it just didn't fit into the cognitive thing where everybody is in a scarcity mode in academia. Everybody's running around trying to get a grant for their study of their pathway of disease. You're only getting funding for disease. And so, it's desperate search because there's always this sense of like, if I don't get my next grant, I'm going to lose my job. And so you're in academia, you're in this trap of, I need the most acceptable science to pitch to the government so that they will pay me, but I can't be too far out of the fringe, but I got to be a little bit out there so it looks like there's innovation happening. But what really is happening is all of our science that's getting governmental funding and all of that is 20 to 30 years old. And so we're very slow to innovate in academia because of this, kind of conservative mindset that sets in around innovation due to the funding cycle. So then you add in like a national healthcare system like you have here in the NHS, and creativity goes away completely. And that's not because British scientists are less creative. It's just the economic systems aren't lending themselves to that human ingenuity and creativity. And yet nature's sitting right there on the other side of it, just waiting. She's just patiently waiting. And if we just walk back into her, the speed of recovery is truly spectacular. So I left the university in 2010, and my health began to recover. I was so depleted, so depressed, so disconnected as a human being, let alone as a doctor who was desperately failing and keeping any of my patients out of disease, let alone out of death. So I went into hospice and palliative care and simultaneously started a nutrition center for reversing chronic disease through food. And so that was 2010. And my hospice care was giving me this beautiful experience of now my job was to remove medications. And so I would stop 13 medications on the first day of admission, and 10% of our patients would get better immediately. And it was like get discharged from death. And they'd go on to live new lives because we took them out of the chemical environment and we plug them back into nature. Suddenly their team is, their care team is now not, a radiologist and a nephrologist and pulmonary cardiovascular docs. Instead, it's a social worker and a chaplain. And they're going into the home to find out what are the stressors in the home. And it turns out one of the biggest stressors was they were on 13 drugs. take off the 13 drugs, their biology is released, their social system is seen. You don't have to fix a family. You just need to see the family. You don't have to fix a person. You need to see the person. And with these hospice teams, we had to go into the home, sit at the bedside, and we were being paid to sit at the bedside for the very first time in my career. And you're not getting paid much, but $5 an hour, you're getting paid to sit there with a patient and just like really listen to the story. And that's when the healing really started to kick in. And so my learning was around death, and that we really never will rebirth until we get our whole cognitive system to collapse so thoroughly that we're no longer trying to cling to life. And the moment you stop clinging to life, it just emerges, because life is a gifting economy.
Mind blown.
It is, isn't it? I actually wanted to touch on a subject that's a bit personal to me, and you kind of mentioned about autism before. Now, my oldest daughter is autistic, and I'd love for you to share your view on the rise of autism, and also if you have a message to parents raising autistic children today.
Autism is absolutely the parallel to this shift in gender. The shift in collapse of genderization is followed by the phenomenon and beauty of the autistic phenomenon. And so the autistic phenomenon is one, again, in which the risk is the failure of function is around the lack of communication interneurologically. So each neuron is firing, everything's working, there's no brain damage in an autistic child. In some of the other neurologic conditions, we see a lot of things like cerebral palsy and things like that. There is a neurologic injury, but in autism, there is none. And everybody's kind of familiar with this kind of Asperger's kind of spectrum disorder that we now say is, and we're no longer naming it Asperger's and autism. We say that everybody's on this autistic spectrum. So it's now ASD, or autism spectrum disorder. Because on the high functioning side of this, they're showing hyper intelligence and extreme pattern recognition and real genius that unlocking. On the really dysfunctional side of autism, you see extreme emotional lability. And this is where the child will scream and hit its head against a wall for 6 to 8 hours a day. My clinic was full of these kids by 2005, 2008. By the time I started my own clinic out in rural Virginia in 2010, it was unbelievable autism in the field. We'd gone from 1 in 5,000 children with autism in 1975. Glyphosate debuted in 1976. By 2020, we're at 1 in 30 kids with autism. And so you can't calculate 1 in 5,000, 1 in 30 in your head, but you can see it and you can feel it in a classroom. There was no autistic kids in my schools growing up, or my kids' schools even in the 1980s and 90s. We really didn't see it at all going on there. And then by the time my kids were hitting, they were all homeschooled all the way through. And so we were masked from it a bit. We didn't see it as much. But then by 2008, 10, now every school is in a crisis because they can't get enough labor into the schools to support these children that are all on the spectrum. And so now given kindergarten class of 20, 25 kids, in the United States, you got 3 or 4 kids in there. So the government's saying that we have 1 in 25, but you walk into a classroom and realize we'd be lucky if it's only 1 in 10. It's more likely we're way below that number already. But even the most optimistic numbers is that we'll have 1 in 3 children with autism spectrum disorder by 2035 in the United States. And so autism is this unmasking of the collective dysfunction of biology. And what it's leading to, similar to the cancer cell that suddenly expresses this much higher intelligence at the energetic level, that child cannot be programmed with the fear, guilt, shame paradigms that its parents were. And so I think the autism journey that we're on is a necessary stop to the storytelling of humans. They cannot accept your version, my version of reality. They can see through the veil. They are seeing multidimensionally. They're telepathic. They are moving energy. They can see energy fields, much like our insects can. And most of biology can see energy fields. Humans have gotten so addicted to the visual cortex that we changed the shape of our brain so that we would appreciate 5 colors more than we would energy fields. And so we train children out of their ability to see energy fields by saying, this is color blue, this is green. Our language and our eyeballs are lying to us. If you see green grass, the only color that is not the grass is green. It's the whole rest of the rainbow. And the only thing it can't accept, the only thing grass is not, is green, so it reflects off its surface. and the human is trained, that's green. So you're actually being subconsciously and consciously trained to actually see everything as the opposite. See everything for what it is not. And now think about your relationships. Who has been in a relationship that they felt like they just, no matter how close they got, they were unseen? This is the collective human experience, is we are unseen because we forgot to watch an energy field, because we're trained out of the energy field, visualizations and understandings and feelings, the sensations of being in an energetic body, in an energetic field of the flow of the universe, trained into. That's green, that's blue, sky is blue, cloud is white, tree is green. That's your reality. Live there. Everything else is woo-woo. I had these two amazing, imaginary friends when I was a kid. I called them Boo Boo and Coco. So Boo Boo and Coco like kept me company, and I grew up in low-income housing in Boulder right at the end of the Vietnam War. And so I was like among refugees from South Asia, myself, a few Hispanic families, and a couple Black families. And it was just like a very interesting melting pot of humanity, but it was mostly Hmong. So you had these South Asian refugees there. And so I was in this environment of like kind of social isolation, a lot of trauma in the adults, poverty, war, etc. And so there was just this need to like withdraw socially, I think, just to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And these two imaginary friends show up, and I was trained by 6 that those are imaginary, they don't exist. Looking back, I know they existed. I remember playing with them, and as much as I do, I actually have an early memory of playing with those two beings than I do like my early friends that I have photographs of. And so this is what the autistic community cannot have. It cannot happen for them. We cannot show them or teach them that their reality doesn't exist. They can see it too clearly. And they don't understand the frequency at which our stories are told in. And so what we found in our clinic over time was that the autistic child is actually expressing the whole vibration of the family. We kept thinking it was the child that was damaged. 3 siblings to the child don't seem to be affected. Parents seem fine, both PhDs in something. That's one of the interesting things about autism. It tends to be at very high rates in extremely educated, high socioeconomic populations, which most diseases have an economic, social, correlation. Lower socioeconomic, more disease. Autism crosses all socioeconomic domains. And so you think, wow, this is a really well-educated, well-resourced family, and this kid must be the one that's got the disease. And we tried for a lot of years detoxing, and the whole, functional medicine thing was growing up at this time. And so it was like, they were all being given vitamin C drips and all kinds of things that our clinic never got into. But I was watching the inefficacy of that across the whole industry. Put them in saunas, we were treating the kid as if it was the problem. And what we saw through my clinic by accident, as all good things are always by happenstance of observation, not idea. But what we started to observe is that we had a modality called emotion code therapy that we were using really heavily throughout the clinic with all diseases that came in. And it's a very simple method for identifying the dominant emotions that are stuck in your body and clear those. And then you kind of work through that with 5 or 7 treatments. And it's amazing how you can shift biology when the emotional field clears. But what we started doing with all of our autistic kids is we couldn't convince the parents that this was going to work on the kid, because they're like, the kid is hitting their head against the wall 7 hours a day. Like, we can't do a treatment for them. So we would do it to the parents to be like, well, this is all that's involved and all this. After a few months of doing that, we started to realize the kid was improving when the parent got emotion code therapy. And that was my slippery slope in realizing that child doesn't have the wound. That child has no filter to be able to believe the wound isn't there. And so it's expressing the collective of the family. And so when we started realizing that, then you can go after the parents. Then you can ask all the questions as siblings of like, who's carrying what into the house that child is expressing. So we call it sensory processing disorder. That's the technical kind of functional, injury in autism. You're not processing all of the information. You can't filter the information out, and so you have to express it. And so what that child is actually expressing is the collective stress in a family. And it's not just the nuclear family. It's the genetic history of the family. And it's the socioeconomic system around the greater family. And what I saw over and over again is the atypical stressors that we don't think of as major stressors for disease. It's the lack of presence in the family that is driving autism and symptoms in the individual child. And so these high pressure double PhD families, that there's a lack of presence in the household because the to-do list is too long in both mother and father, and they're vacant energetically from the space, and the child is expressing what it feels like to be in a state of vacancy of energy.
The frustration.
To see a mom's body walks in without her energy field attached to it is terrifying. It must be. To see a father walk in and its energy field is in complete chaos due to its concentration on 1,000 things that aren't due to right now. The child now has no correlation between the current reality and the behavior of its own parents. So it's this lack of presence that I think is really a key to it connecting with a child. So that's what I learned to do in my clinic, is these children that look like they can't even function in a social setting at all, they would come in. I would go completely still and present. I wouldn't look at the medical chart, wouldn't look at the parents. I just go right inside and I just go completely still. And kids bouncing off the walls of my clinic, breaking things, running around. And if I don't react and I just stay very centered, and if I become the dominant energy in the room with that stillness, pretty soon the kid's sitting on my lap, looking at my face. The kid is showing you the collective whole. And if we get really, really present, which is hard to do when the kid is expressing so much stress, it's hard to train your own neurologic system out of the reactionary stance. But that's the journey for autism ultimately. As a society, we need to come to terms with the fact that these children are revealing to us in a very in-your-face fashion the amount of pent-up trauma and dissonance in our energy field as a human species.
A lot to unpack there.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And it's not a judgment on any of these families. Again and again, mothers of autistic children, you all are saints. The amount of stress that a mother and a father will go through in the journey with an autistic child is unmeasurable. It's never been seen before, this level of stress. I see it greater than that of a child with cancer, because it's daily and there's this understanding that this is for life. The reality is these children do grow out of this, especially if the environment changes. And I think that's why most autistic children improve, is because the family starts to disintegrate and they start to get a larger social structure put in place around them. Aunts, uncles have to come in and support. Grandparents have to support. Pretty soon teachers and continuing ed, assistants are supporting. So pretty soon their constellation is big. And that's when you see the kids steadily improving, because now their ecosystem is much more integrated. And they've got grounding spaces for a parent who's not present that day or is stressed out. It's not the parent should never have stress. It's that the parent shouldn't be the only input to the child. And the phenomenon of the nuclear family, which was probably aptly named, the nuclear doesn't typically ends in an explosion, but that nuclear family of the 1950s really set us up for this neurologic phenomenon of this. And so we started seeing autism express itself in the 60s and 70s very early on. It didn't go really logarithmic until the 1990s, but it was there, and it was really starting to poke its head out at this early phase.
Before we dive back into the podcast, let's talk about one of our favourite topics, hydration.
So many electrolyte products on the market right now are loaded with artificial sweeteners and flavours, and honestly, that's not what we want when we're trying to properly hydrate our bodies.
That's why we love True Hydration by Ancient and Brave. It's inspired by the natural electrolytes you'd find in coconut water, but with the added benefits of magnesium, potassium and prebiotic fibre, so it's hydration that actually supports your whole body.
The addition of chromium is also amazing for the blood sugar balancing effects. We have it first thing in the morning before coffee, and it's become a non-negotiable in our routine. It's also perfect when we're travelling or for a quick rehydrate after a sauna. The single-serve sachets make it so easy to take on the go.
We're big fans of Ancient and Brave because they blend ancestral wisdom with modern science, and that is exactly what Raise is all about.
But what sets Ancient and Brave apart isn't just their award-winning products, it's their commitment to sustainability. They're a B Corp and proud members of 1% for the planet, meaning that 1%, actually now 2%, of all their sales goes directly to environmental causes that protect our planet. So every time you buy from Ancient and Brave, you're not just investing in your well-being, you're contributing to a healthier planet too.
To find out more about Ancient and Brave, visit ancientandbrave.earth/planet and use the code RAISE for 20% off your first one-off purchase. Just quickly, because I know we're kind of running out of time, but whilst we're on the topic of children, There's actually been quite a lot of scaremongering in the UK recently, talking about measles and a strong emphasis on children getting vaccinated for measles. But what are your thoughts on viruses such as measles?
Viruses are among the most misunderstood part of the entire biology of life. Viruses are not living organisms. They cannot attack anything. They're very passive. There's not aggressive viruses out there. There's viruses that are taken up more actively by human cells for different reasons, but it always has to have a reason. The most regulated step in all of life is the decision to take in a new gene and transcribe that and turn it into a protein and then integrate it into your own genome. There's 200 regulatory steps that have to all align to say, yes, we want this virus to express a new gene. The virome, which is a description of the library of viruses globally, is literally the imagination of nature for the future of the planet that hasn't happened yet. That's what viruses are. It's the imagination of every single organism on Earth putting out a new genetic possibility for life to come. The whole concept of evolution is not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the most creative. And the organisms that are most creative are those that are not in stress. If organisms go into stress, they start misspelling their genome and expressing it as viruses. So if I'm stressed, I want to find solutions for the organisms around me that aren't stressed. And then for that, we see this movement of intelligence, this movement of beauty, this movement towards more and more diversity rather than monoculture throughout all of the planetary history. For 4 billion years, more beauty, more intelligence. Every single extinction is an acceleration of imagination because now every organism is stressed. And that's the beauty of this century we're in again. This is the highest biodiversity that's ever existed on the planet. At the last extinction, all the flora was palms and ferns. Today we've got deciduous trees and wildflowers that are stressed to the point of extinction because we're using 2 billion pounds of glyphosate every year on them. This level of imagination has never been seen before. And so we have millions of new species that didn't exist at the point of the last extinction 55 million years ago, all co-imagining what's going to come next. So every species, every human, every earthworm is right now imagining a new genomic possibility for life on Earth, and we call those viruses, and we demonize them. And we try to find antiviral agents, and we're killing viruses, and we're afraid of viruses. So that's problem number one with the whole modality of fear, guilt, shame that we have going around. Not just vaccines, but the general concept of viruses about to attack us. It's just erroneous. It's not true biologically. We've known that argument is not true for 20 years. But again, it's very slow for academia to catch up with the science that we now know. We're always 20 to 30 years behind. And so the whole vaccine story is also very antiquated back to the germ theory. And so there was a belief that human bodies are healthy and then they get attacked by organisms and cause disease. Therefore, we should immunize the healthy body against disease that organism can never enter. That was 1940s, 1950s thinking. That was the advent of penicillin and antibiotics. And we were so excited. We thought, well, nobody's going to die now because we have antibiotics. And if we can sterilize the human body, it will never get disease. And it would take us 50 years of sterilizing the human body to find out we created disease by the sterilization process. So less microorganisms in the body, the less energy available, the less communication, the more disease. It took 50 years of doing the wrong thing to figure it all out. What we have begun to update is the realization of like, whoa, we should have probiotics. Probiotics don't work. They kind of function like antibiotics actually because they're a monoculture. But nonetheless, at least we started to think there's good bacteria. We haven't yet kind of realized all genes are good. There's no bad genes. All genes are good and they're all available all the time. And our body is scanning an enormous amount of those every day for gain of function. So there was fear mongering around these gain of function laboratories. You've got a laboratory that's trying to figure out chemical warfare, viral warfare. That's nefarious and dark. I see that. But my body was the original gain of function laboratory for humanity. This thing is unbelievably more efficient. Every day, every moment, like right now, as I sit here, I've got 10 to the 8th different genes, different viruses in my bloodstream. That's 10 billion. So I've got 10 billion new genes coursing through my body, giving me the opportunity to scan for one that would help me do something that I've never done before. The evolution of energetics instead of genetics will get us to a sacred geometry in the water, holds a more complex genome. The genome now has access to new genes as it goes through that transformation because all of the stress biology of the planet is reimagining itself. And so my body is scanning for all of the new possibilities of what do I need to do biologically to become part of a future humanity that survives the extinction. and not only survives, but goes on to do a biology that's more intelligent, more beautiful, more connected than ever before. And so viruses, not bad, not a single one of them. If you see a virus becoming being uptook into the human experience at high volumes, like we did with something like flu every year. We used to just call it flu. Now we call it COVID because everybody gets a fever now. They all have COVID, but there's thousands of respiratory viruses that are very predictably causing fever, and all of these syndromes. And so those viruses are taken up when we get really dysfunctional at the immune system level. And so when you see the immune system expressing a virus, i.e., I got 3 days of fever and I'm fatigued and I must be sick. No, your body is stimulating itself into a massive cascade of antioxidants, regeneration of precancerous cells that have accumulated. The fever is really good at eliminating cancer. And so my body needed that big inflammatory reaction to do a regenerative process because I had accumulated too much stress because of the monotony of the poisoning that I was doing to myself all year. My vitamin D levels drop in the winter time naturally, and so I get a little immune deficient, and the immune system's like, we got to stimulate this guy. Like he is like literally accumulating cancer cells too quickly. He's going to die. We need a big fever. We need something. Here's a protein that might be helpful in the future. I'm going to pick that one up. I'll have a couple billion cells take that and overproduce that. We'll create an inflammatory event. Fever for 3 days. He needs to focus only on regeneration. We're going to make him so tired he can't even lift his head off to look at his Instagram feed. We call it sickness, but it's rebirth. That viral syndrome is a rebirth every single time. You end up so much healthier after one of these syndromes.
I always notice that with my kids. I'm like, it's
They
like
are
they're like
bouncing off the
different
walls.
people. Yeah. And I feel like something's evolved in some way. I'm like, you've grown, something's changed. So it's really interesting that you said that.
That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're rebirthing.
I love that take.
So then with that lens, you look at vaccines and you realize, wow, this is very old science. We used to think that we were just being attacked by measles, mumps, rubella, and all these things. Now we know that the body was intelligently demonstrating the stressors in the whole population when these things would go endemic or epidemic. All we have to do is change the stressors underneath the organismal population thing, and that disease goes away. The scary thing about vaccines is, again, it's 50-year-old science. We keep thinking that, well, measles must be bad for the organism, not realizing that when you stimulate the immune system to attack measles before it's gotten the genetic update of an infection, the body is now confused for the rest of its life of its relationship to something like measles. And measles is just one bacterium in a whole suite of different, genetic expressions of nature. And so you vaccinate something against, would be a better one, like hepatitis B is given on the first day of birth in the United States. And so we're vaccinating children on day one to a very rare infection that's transmitted through sex and IV drug use. But for one reason or another, we start vaccinating on day one with hepatitis B. And the mortality rate in the United States is higher on day one than any other place in the world. And so we've got this correlation between first day vaccination and a disruption of life. And so your mortality goes up. And a lot of people have been concerned about these like first day and 14-day vaccines because the immune system can't actually function like a vaccine should. A vaccine is theoretically showing you a protein that your immune system then makes an antibody to. The child's body doesn't have the ability to make an antibody to a protein for at least 6 months. And so there's no scientific reason that I can think of that you would want a vaccine to be stimulating an infant on day one. Nonetheless, as you start to force that child to be reactive to that family of viruses or bacteria, it's going to be co-reacting to a whole host of the microbiome that we can't even imagine. So it undermines their immune system, which is, again, supposed to be relationships, healthy relationships to everything. And so when you put that vaccine into the equation, now you're putting a relationship function of the immune system into a warlike, aggressive behavior towards the microbiome. And this is why we see, this almost what seems like an inexplicable correlation between 5 vaccines to 16 vaccines to 36 vaccines to now 265 doses between 0 and 25 that the kids are supposed to be exposed to now. And so that march of reaction, warfare, and now the immune system is in constant belief that it is in conflict with the nature within it. And so the child's stress level is going up every time we put it in opposition to its own microbiome. And so because we now know that the microbiome is radically important to all health and all disease can be mapped back to dysfunction between the immune system and its microbiome, we need to rethink the entire vaccine program.
Mm.
And what's clear is like the consequences of vaccines are much lower if we just wait a little bit. If you wait until age 3, if you wait until age 5, at each of those points, there's this radical decrease in the complications and adverse effects of vaccines. I'm not against vaccines. We have to rethink the science with the science that we now know. We've got 30 to 50 years of science that is just not being acknowledged in our current vaccine programs. And for that, we have a very antiquated health system. And so we need intelligent understanding of the complex relationships between a child, its immune system, and microbiome at large. And then we should build within that system. And so we need to re-ask the original premise and start to look at the problem differently.
Amazing.
I think we're unfortunately running out of time. We've got so many other different topics of conversation we wanted to discuss with you. But we just have some quick fire questions. If that's okay, we round off kind of every episode with a quick fire.
No pressure.
So first one, do you have a morning routine?
No, I have absolutely no routine. Every single day is different for me. I travel all the time. And I think that's one of my big hacks on life is no day should actually be in routine. Biology is always changing and transforming. And my lifestyle is curiously created an environment where my body every day is like, what's next? And it's not allowed to get into a rut. Every day I'm adapting. I have to adapt every day. Every day I breathe different air. It's unusual for me to be in the same bed for 3 days at a time. I'm moving and I'm moving and I'm moving. So my body's breathing new air. It's challenged by new things. It's, the speed at which I travel around the world is forcing my body to start to really become more and more present. I can't get into the reliance of the sun comes up at 6 a.m. every morning. I need to ground into the ground. I got to get my shoes off. I need to stand on grass for half an hour every time I land somewhere. I need to get body to know like, this is now home. This is me. This is my whole self. I am complete. And so that speed of travel out of systems is really kind of a fun thing. So like I said, I'm bad at rapid fire.
No, it's great.
Good. I love that.
This isn't actually on a list, but I've been very curious. What do you do with regards to eating? Because I'm sure for you want to get the best quality food you can, but when you're traveling a lot, do you just have to kind of let go of the worry or the concern of what you're consuming? Or
I get bigger. And so my energy field is so much brighter than any piece of food on this planet. My energy field is logarithmically more powerful than any toxin created on this planet. It's when I'm not present in my body that these things become poisons. When I'm really present and I send through my body a cascade of gratitude before I put something in my mouth. And I recognize that I'm a conduit between Mother Earth and these higher vibrations that we might call heaven. If I stand in that space and recognize my body as a conduit for energy to emerge from a planet and be expressed to the cosmos through the expression of feeling that I'm going to emanate out into the world because I am a feeling vessel. And I'm going to feel right now gratitude for this food. And I'm going to put this in with a sense that I can transmute all the toxins through gratitude. And I can turn this into unconditional love as I take the shadow of humanity and I turn it into the light that humans are capable of generating through something like the technology of a human heart. That's what we're here to do. We didn't show up for a perfect life. We didn't come in here to experience perfection. We would have just stayed light bodies. We attached to a physical reality that's poisoned and at the end of a cycle so that we could transmute a little bit of shadow, a little bit of darkness into light every day, and therefore tip the scale of the cosmos towards its next iteration, which might be brighter.
Amazing. That was not what I was expecting you to say. So thank you.
What is your view on supplements?
I hope that the industry is completely obsolete in the next 20, 30 years.
Okay.
At the speed that we can recover farms, there's an irrational belief that we need supplementation. The whole word dietary supplement. Wow. What would come in addition to a diet, to make you healthy? We developed the dietary supplement industry because there was a failure of nutrition within our food system. That needs to go away. And so I've made most of my money and most of my force of change on the planet. It's funded all my nonprofits. It's seed funded a bunch of companies working at this section of human. All of that's come out of my supplement company, which produces a soil supplement,
which we love, by the way.
Ion.
Yeah.
And so that Ion is a supplement, dietary supplement that as a company, we've decided we want to get enough education and published science into the field over the next 20 years that our product goes obsolete. There's no reason we should need fossil soils to bring this amount of communication and energy into the food system, except that we destroyed our soils globally. So right now, today, 97% of soils globally are depleted or severely depleted of these nutrients that are in the Ion. But by bringing this back online, we're showing farmers how they can create that content with just a few seasons of good crop management, good soil management, and a reconnection of diverse biodiversity within their biosphere. And they're turning on all of that biology. And so I dream of a near day where not only my company, but all supplement companies have become obsolete.
Okay.
Zach, what's one book that changed your life?
I guess the biggest one of this decade was The Gospel of Mary Magdalene. It shattered my whole worldview. So it's a disruptive book.
Okay.
Second to that would be Course in Miracles.
What's one thing you think every parent should know?
I think Khalil Gibran probably answered that question the best 100 years ago, and so we'll go with his answer. He says it's very easy to parent. All you have to do is strive every day to think more like your child and make sure you never make your child think like you.
Oh, I love
yeah,
that.
I like that.
And what's one piece of advice you'd give to the next generation?
Don't listen to your parents.
And then we've got a final question from Cole's mum, who's my mother-in-law, as we said.
Possibly your biggest fan.
Literally. So her question for you is, you often use the analogy of the practice of seeing beauty in everything you do. Is it possible that developing this view can eventually lead us to a higher state of consciousness?
It already has. It's already happening globally. And it's really the practice of seeing everything as a miracle. And so that Einstein kind of got credited with it, but I think many people were recognizing at the beginning of the 20th century that there's only two ways to live life. Only you understand that absolutely everything is a miracle, or they don't exist at all. Mm-hmm. And when you really come to terms with that and really own that at the fullest level, then the world around you does change. Mm-hmm. Because I believe that humans don't have free will. Understanding, as you start to understand quantum physics, you realize there's quadrillions of interactions at any millisecond of reality determining the fate of every next thing. There's no way that a human being comes along and affects those trillions of inputs to change the course of something through our volitional activity or our idea. Mm-hmm. This stuff is emerging through us. Life force is emerging through us. Energy, ideas, creativity, all nature speaking itself through our neurology and etc. And so we have no free will. But the Kabbalistic teachings from 9,000 years ago make it very clear that humans are unique in the animal kingdom of having radical free will as to how we feel about the journey. And so the secret to being human is feel everything. Mm-hmm. And if you feel everything, you actually do begin to participate in the fabric of reality for the nature around us and within us. And this is what happens when you come present with a houseplant, or you sit under a tree and you notice it and you see it and you say, "You are beautiful." Mm-hmm. And when you tell a tree it's beautiful, we now know that all of its root system exudes new chemicals into the ground to sprout new roots, to transmute toxins in those soils, to reconnect the microbiome down there. If a human being can feel beauty in a tree and change an oak tree that's been standing for 400 years, mm-hmm. we have a very special role in nature. We have mm-hmm. freedom to feel everything, and we feel uniquely for the biology within us because we are not a species. We are an ecosystem mm-hmm. that is connected, more interconnected than any other part of nature. Mm-hmm. The human colon holds more complex biodiversity than any other niche within the entire natural system of the world. The human is nature at a more dense, more intelligent fashion than anywhere else in the world. And so when the densest part of nature shows up and says, "Oak tree, you are beautiful," mm-hmm. she exudes new life force. And when you show up and you tell a child, "Don't think like me. You're already beautiful. You're already whole. Don't listen to everybody else. There's nothing wrong with you. Never let anybody tell you you're sinful. Never let anybody tell you are not enough. You are complete. You're vibrating as a whole being. That's the only way you could have knit yourself together in your mother's womb, because she, for God's sake, didn't make you. She has no idea what you are. You created yourself because you're whole. You are the mother. You are the father. You are the child of your own self. You knit yourself together in your mother's womb. And she was blinded from that, which is a special thing about creation. The only part in our body that truly brings forth life anew is the womb. And that womb has to be hidden from the mother completely. For if her immune system for a split second saw that fetus, she would destroy it because it's not her tissue. So she has to be blind to the process. She uses progesterone to do that. And so the uterus is uniquely positioned between those two ovaries to create a literal umbrella, a blinding agent over the uterus so that she can turn that over to source completely. The process of becoming pregnant is to surrender your own body available for nature to create through. I have a womb, and I create companies through it, and I create ideas through it, and I create songs through it, and my guitar. And I'll sit down at a piano and let my womb express something from nature. We are creative forces. But to create, you have to stop overwhelming the system with your thoughts. Stop overwhelming the system with the emotional chaos of a human heart. Get down into your womb space. Surrender to source for a moment in your silence. And in that stillness, beauty is going to break forth.
I think that was a lovely way to finish this conversation. Zach, thank you so much for joining us today. And where can people find you?
You can go out and dig a hole. Plant a tree.
I love
You'll find me there.
Wow.
We'll tag you for people that don't know you. Yeah.
You'll find me all over the place. But
Traveling.
I'm in nature now. I'll find you if you don't find me.
Thank you so much for your time today. Honestly, that conversation
we really
was incredible.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Zach.
Grateful for what you all are doing with this podcast. Thank you, audience, for co-creating that.